All right, let's start. Please read one of you. She had a few. Now we are referring about the kind of friends that D had in her life. So please read. Please hurry. Let's not waste time like this. Didn't I make myself clear? I asked one of you to read. This is ridiculous. The thing is getting recorded and you can't even start reading. Quick.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes, please. Please do read.
She had a few furtive boys in pink shirts hanging about on wash day after school, nervous girls who never laughed. Impressed with her, they worshipped the well turned face, the cute shape, the scalding humor that erupted like bubbles in light. She read to them. When she was quoting Jimmy T, she didn't have much time to pay to us, but turned all her fault-finding power on him. He flew to marry a cheap city girl from a family of ignorant, flashy people. She hardly had time to recompose herself. When she comes, I will meet, but there they are. Maggie attempts to make a dash for the house in a shuffling way. But I stay but I stay her with my hand. Come back here, I say, and she stops and tries to dig a well in the sand with her toe. It is hard to see them clearly through the strong sun, but even the first glimpse of leg out of the car tells me it is Dee. Her feet were always neat looking, as if God Himself had shaped them with a certain style. From the other side of the car comes a short, stocky man. Hair is all over his head, a foot long, and hanging from his chin like a kinky mule tail. I hear Maggie suck in her breath. Is what it sounds like. Like when you see the wriggling end of a snake just in front of your foot on the road. Ah, D next. A dress down to the ground in this hot weather. A dress so loud it hurts my eyes. There are yellows and oranges to throw back the light of the sun. I feel my whole face warming from the heat waves it throws out. Earrings gold too, and hanging down to her shoulders. Bracelets dangling and making noises when she moves her arm up to shake the folds of the dress out of her armpits. The dress is loose and flows, and as she walks closer, I like it. I hear Maggie go again. It is her sister's hair. It's done straight up like the wool on a sheep. It is black as night, and around the edges are two long pigtails that rope about like small lizards disappearing behind her ears. Wasuzo teen o, she says, coming on in that gliding, gliding way the dress makes her move. The short, stocky fellow with the hair to his navel, all grinning, and he follows up with Assalamu alaikum, my mother and sister. He moves to hug Maggie, but she falls back, right up against the back of my chair. I feel her trembling there, and when I look up, I see the perspiration falling off her chin.
Okay, pause a while. So what do we see? We have the grand entry of D. So she's come by a car and look at the thing. You can picturize, you can imagine the thing. So she's putting her feet out, right? Very shapely. So this is the way you have all these beautiful divas, heroines arrive at a place, right? So likewise, you have D coming out of the car. And from the other side of the car comes this short and well-built man, stocky man. So he's got lot of hair on his head, and then on his chin there is this very small beard. So it's looking like a kinky mule tail. So it's a very funny description. Mule as in a donkey-like creature, right? So kinky as in very wiry kind of a hair. So on the whole, a funny looking man. So just seeing them, Maggie is now getting nervous. So it's as if like she's digging a well with her toe standing there. She's trying to run away from there because she's so scared and tensed being there in the presence of her sister and this stranger. And then comes Dee out of the car, and look at her, the way she's dressed. She's dressed in this very bright color, all oranges and yellows. So it's already sunny, and the eyes find it very difficult to look at the sun or look towards the car because of the bright sunlight. And add to that these flaming colored dress. So when she comes closer, Mama starts liking the dress. So it's a very nice, bold, pretty, beautiful kind of a dress with lots of pleats and folds. You've seen the movie, right? So it will tell you what it looks like. And then she has all these trinkets and earrings of gold, then bracelets making all kind of jingling noises. And then she's coming closer. So what do we see? Her hair is all straight and like wool on a sheep. And looking at all this, the sister Maggie, she's becoming all the more insecure. Why? Because we know she's totally opposite to what D is. So she's feeling kind of insecure and disturbed. So now she's sweating. The sister Maggie is sweating. So she's coming and greeting them. Afrikaans, where you say hello. So she's saying that she's coming gliding because her dress is all like, trailing behind her. And this man is also following her. And then he's grinning. And what is he doing? He's saying Assalamu alaikum and calling Mama and Maggie, mother and sister. And he's trying to go and hug Maggie. But then Maggie is kind of falling back. And then she's trying to take support of the mother's chair. She's standing there all shaking. She just can't take this stranger coming and showing this kind of a familiarity with her. So she's already breaking into sweat. Please continue from there.
Don't get up, says Dee. Since I'm stout, it takes me something of a push. You can see me trying to move a second or two before I make it. She turns, showing white heels through her sandals, and goes back to the car. Out she peeks next with a Polaroid. She stoops down quickly and snaps off picture after picture of me sitting there in front of the house with Maggie cowering behind me. She never takes a shot without making sure the house is included. When a cow comes nibbling around the edge of the yard, she snaps it and me and Maggie and the house. Then she puts a Polaroid back in the seat of the car and comes up and kisses me on the forehead. Meanwhile, Assalamu alaikum is going through motions with Maggie's hand. Maggie's hand is as limp as a fish and probably as cold, despite the sweat, and she keeps trying to pull it back. It looks like Assalamu alaikum wants to shake hands but wants to do it fancy. Or maybe he don't know how people shake hands. Anyhow, he soon gives up on Maggie. Well, I say, D. No, Mama, she says, not D. Wangero Libanica Kemanjo. What happened to Dee? I wanted to know. She's dead, Wangero said. I couldn't bear it any longer, being named after the people who oppress me. You know as well as me, you was named after your aunt Dicey. I said, Dicey is my sister. She named Dee. We called her Big D after Dee was born. But who was she named after? Asked Wangero. I guess after Grandma Dee, I said. And who was she named after? Asked Wangero. Her mother, I said, and so Wangero was getting tired. It's about as far back as I can trace it, I said, though in fact it probably could have carried it back. Beyond the Civil War through the branches. Well, said Assalamu alaikum. There you are. I heard Maggie say. There I was not, I said, before Dissy cropped up in our family, so why should I try to trace it that far back? He just stood there grinning, looking down on me like somebody inspecting a Model A car. Every once in a while, he and Wangero sent eye signals over my head. How do you pronounce this name? I asked. You don't have to call me by it if you don't want to, said Wangero. Why shouldn't I? I asked. If that's what you want us to call you, we'll call you. I know it might sound awkward at first, said Wangero. I'll get used to it, I said. Dream it out again. Well, soon we got the name out of the way. Assalamu alaikum had a name twice as long and 3 times as hard. After I tripped over it 2 or 3 times, he told me to just call him Hakim a Baba. I wanted to ask him was he a Baba, but I didn't really think he was, so I didn't ask. You must belong to those beef cattle peoples down the road, I said. They said Assalamu alaikum when they met you too, but they didn't shake hands. Always too busy feeding the cattle, fixing the fences, putting up salt lick shelters, throwing down hay. When the white folks poisoned some of the herd, the men stayed up all night with rifles in their hands. I walked a mile and a half just to see the sight. Hakimi Baba said, I accept some of their doctrines, but farming and raising cattle is not my style. They didn't tell me, and I didn't ask whether Wangero D had really gone and married him.
Okay, pause
We
a while. Okay, so what do we find? So now D, she's come back, and then it's a very comic scene. This man, the mother's calling him Assalamu alaikum because she hasn't got the name right. So this man, he's trying to give a shaken to Maggie, but Maggie is trying to shake her hand off, and her hand has gone so cold and limp, though she was perspiring. So it was a very funny scene. So the more he would try to shake her hands, the more she would try to move away from there. And finally, this man, he stopped his effort to give a shaken to Maggie. So now coming back to D, what do we see? She says, don't call me D. Now she's given a new name to herself. She calls herself, what's that long name? Vangero Livanica Kemanjo. So that's her new name. So the mother's asking, what happened to your old name, D? So she's saying, D is dead. I don't want to be called after the people who oppress me. So this, with this act of changing her name and calling herself some other name, by doing that, what is she doing? She's effacing, she's kind of deleting a part of her own history, detaching herself from the part of the roots that she comes from. So she's kind of not claiming that heritage. So she doesn't want to have anything to do with the black heritage, the history, the kind of custom traditions that are associated with that particular name. So we come to know that she was named after her aunt, and that is Mama's sister, and Mama's sister was named after her mother. So like this has been running for 3 generations, this name. And then Mama also says that maybe I can trace it back to the civil war during that time. But then she's saying that why should I bother? And then others also, they say it's okay, like and then this girl D, she says that if you're uncomfortable with my name, new name Wanguru, then don't call me that, you don't have to. Then she says that it might be very awkward to call me like that at first, but then the mother says, okay, we'll get used to it. So now they're trying to get used to the new name that D has. And then we come to know this man, he had a name just as complicated and longer than that. So twice as long and 3 times as hard. So finally the mother is giving up. She cannot get the name. So finally this man, Assalamu alaikum, he tells her that you can call me Hakima Barber. So she's wondering whether he is a barber. But then she doesn't ask him, she's thinking, but then she thinks, okay, he cannot be a barber because just look at him, his all his hair and beard, everything. So he cannot be a barber. So she's making a guess. So maybe you belong to the group of people, the community of people who rear cattle, and all the time they're busy with milking the cattle, feeding and fixing the fences. So do you belong to them? So Hakima Barber, he's saying, I accept some of their doctrines, but then farming and raising cattle is just not my style. I don't believe in all that, so I don't do that. And then she's wondering whether D is now married to this fellow, and she's wondering the relationship shared between D and this visitor, that is Hakima Barber. But then they didn't tell me, and I didn't ask whether Wangaroo D had really gone and married him. So you can already see in the kind of distance that has cropped up between D and her family. So right from the beginning, she was kind of a aloof or kind of a loner who was not really into a deep relationship. So these people are just guessing. Maggie and mother, they have no means of knowing what is the relationship between these two. Kindly continue.
We sat down to eat, and right away he said he didn't eat collards and pork was unclean. Wangero, though, went on through the chitlins and cornbread, the greens, and everything else. She talked a blue streak over the sweet potatoes. Everything delighted her, even the fact that we still used the benches her daddy made for the table when we couldn't afford to buy new, when we couldn't afford to buy chairs. Oh, Mama, she cried, then turned to Hakim Baba. I never knew how lovely these benches are. You can feel the rum prints, she said, running her hands underneath and along the bench. Then she gave a sigh and her hand closed over Grandma D's butter dish. That's it, she said. I knew there was something I wanted to ask you if I could have. She jumped up from the table and went over in the corner where the churn stood, and the milk in it clabber by now. She looked at the churn and looked at it. This churn top is what I need, she said. Didn't Uncle Buddy whittle it out of a tree you all used to have? Yes, I said. Uh-huh, she said happily. And I want the dasher too. Uncle Buddy, Uncle Buddy whittled that too? Asked the barber. D. Wangero looked up at me. Auntie's first husband whittled the dash, said Maggie so low you almost couldn't hear her. His name was Henry, but they called him Stash. Maggie's brain is like an elephant's, Wangero said, laughing. I can use a churn top as a centerpiece for the alcove table, she said, sliding a plate over the churn, and I'll think of something artistic to do with the dasher. When she finished wrapping the dasher, the handle stuck out. I took it for a moment in my hands. You didn't even have to look close to see where hands pushing the dasher up and down to make butter had left a kind of sink in the wood. In fact, there were a lot of small sinks. You could see where thumbs and fingers had sunk into the wood. It was beautiful yellow light. It was beautiful light yellow wood from a tree that grew in the yard where Big D and Stash had lived. After
Okay,
dinner, D.
just a second, just a second. So they're having food, and what is happening here? Dee is already staking her claim to many of these family heirlooms. So there is something like a churn there. What is a churn? It's some kind of a thing used to make that is to separate butter from the curd. First you make curd from milk and then you separate butter from that, right? So you kind of churning it, something like a kadol or something you call it, right? So these things that were in the family for many generations and were made by hand. So these are all handicraft, those kind of things that are considered to be exotica by outsiders and people like us. So D is already taking claim to all that, and they're talking about the history of all these things. So there is this churn, and there's a churn top. So there's a cover to that. So she's saying, I want to take that top, and she's going to go keep it at her own house, and she's going to keep it like a centerpiece for the alcove table that she has. And then she's saying, I'll think of something artistic to do with the dasher. Dasher is that kind of thing with which you put your hands on that and you churn. So and when you look at that wooden piece, you can find the mark of many hands. That is, when you use all these kind of handmade things for a long time, your hand imprint would be there, right? So it was looking very old as well as very quaint, old and quaint, and with a nice beauty of its own. So Dee is already staking her claim to all these things, and she wants to take them away. And also that history associated with all these things are discussed. So we come to see how she's becoming very excited about everything. So she's like this visitor, outsider who has come there, and she sees all these things. So like a child, I want this, I want that, and she's kind of claiming all these family heirlooms.
After dinner, D. Wangero went to the trunk at the foot of my bed and started rifling through it. Maggie hung back in the kitchen over the dishpan. Out came Wangero with two quilts. They had been pieced by Grandma D, and then Big D and me had hung them on the quilt frames on the front porch and quilted them. One was in the Lone Star pattern, the other was Walk Around the Mountain. In both of them were scraps of dresses Grandma D had worn 50 and more years ago, bits and pieces of Grandpa Jarrell's paisley shirts, and one teeny faded blue piece about the size of a penny matchbox that was from Great Grandpa Ezra's uniform that he wore in the Civil War. Mama, Wangero said, sweet as a bird, can I have these old quilts? I heard something fall in the kitchen, and a minute later the kitchen door slammed. Why don't you take one or two of the others? I asked. These old things was just done by me and Big D from some tops your grandma pieced before she died. No, said Wangero. I don't want those. They are stitched around the borders by machine. That'll make them last better, I said. That's not the point, said Wangero. These are all pieces of dresses Grandma used to wear. She did all the stitching by hand. Imagine, she held the quilt securely in her arms, stroking them.
Okay, so what is happening here after this food? After having food, she's going to the bed. I mean, under the bed was kept this trunk, and she's going through the trunk. And meanwhile, Maggie has gone to the kitchen, and maybe she's washing some, I know, the pots and pans. So Wangaroo, what has she done? She's got two quilts from that trunk. She's come back. Now, this is the history of the quilt. So, this was pieced by Grandma D and then Big D, that is her sister. And then they had actually hung them on the quilt frames on the front porch and quilted them. So, they have these frames, wooden frames, and they put the cloth over that and they sit and stitch. So, there are patterns, there are nice embroidery kind of thing done on these quilts. So, one is the Lone Star. So, there's just one star, that was the pattern, and the other one, it was a walk around the mountain. So it's kind of a scenery. And then all these are made from these bits and pieces of dresses that Grandma D had worn how many years back? 50 years. And then there are pieces from Grandpa Jarrell's paisley colored, I mean light colored shirts. And then there was one small piece, a blue piece. It actually came from Great Grandpa Ezra's uniform that he had worn in the Civil War. So you can understand this is actually a piece of history. This quilt is a piece of history, and every piece of cloth tells you about a story about a person in the family, a member of the family, and the kind of life that they lived. So you can see the kind of memories that are associated with it, and also you can see how they're all very old. These are all old pieces. So now Wangaroo, she's being very sweet. You see, she's talking like a bird, can I have these old quills? So you can understand how selfish she is. She's just play acting. And then the moment she asks that, the mother hears something fall in the kitchen, and minute later the kitchen door slams. So we hear that who was shocked hearing this? Maggie. So it was Maggie who had actually sat with her mother and made all these things with her hand, with the needle and thread. These women had sat and made it. So hearing that, Maggie was shocked. It was actually her property. So she dropped something and maybe she got angry. That's why she shut the door in a loud voice. So the mother saying, why don't you take the other two quilts? And these are actually very old ones. And then this was just done by me and Big D. And that's from some tops that your grandma had put together. So grandma had stitched it, but then it had come off, and then they added more cloth to it. So that's how quilting is kind of passed on from one generation to the other. So if you have some torn bits and pieces, that gets replaced with another pieces of cloth that are sturdier and stronger. So now Wangaroo is saying, I don't want the other quilts because they are stitched in the corner by machine. So they are stitched by sewing machine. So the mother saying, so that kind of a quilt will last longer. So now Wangaroo is saying that's not the point. Actually, just imagine these old quilts. These are pieces of dresses that grandma used to wear, and then she did it all by hand, hand stitching. Imagine. So how exotic the whole thing is. And this is like a relic, something really, really old. So she's already grabbed the quilt and she's securely putting it in her arms, and she's kind of stroking. That is, she's passing her hand over the quilts. So this shows how she sees these things as exotica, something to be treasured and locked and kept away, not used for daily purposes. Unlike what is believed by mother and Maggie. Please continue.
Some of the pieces, like those lavender ones, come from old clothes her mother handed down to her, I said, moving up to touch the quilts. D. Wangero moved back just enough so that I couldn't reach the quilts. They already belonged to her. Imagine, she breathed again, clutching them closely to her bosom. The truth is, I said, I promised to give them quilts to Maggie for when she marries John Thomas. She gasped like a bee had stung her. Maggie can't appreciate these quilts, she said. She'd probably be backward enough to put them to everyday use. I reckon she would, I said. God knows I've been saving 'em long enough with nobody using 'em. I hope she will. I didn't want to bring up how I had offered Dee Wangero a quilt when she went away to college. Then she had told they were old-fashioned, out of style. But they're priceless, she was saying now, furiously. For she has a temper. Maggie would put them on the bed and in 5 years they'd be in rags. Less than that. She'll always make some more, I said. Maggie knows how to quilt. D. Wangero looked at me with hatred. You just will not understand. The point is these quilts, I said. Well, I said, stumped. What would you do with them? Hang them, she said, as if that was the only thing you could do with quilts. Maggie by now was standing in the door. I could almost hear the sound her feet made as they scraped over each other. She can have them, Mamma, she said, like somebody used to never winning anything, or having anything reserved for her. I can remember Grandma D without the quilts. I looked at her hard. She had filled her bottom lip with checkerberry snuff and gave her face a kind of dopey hangdog look. It was Grandma D and Big D who taught her how to quilt herself. She stood there with her scarred hands hidden in the folds of her skirt. She looked at her sister with something like fear, but she wasn't mad at her. This was Maggie's portion. This was the way she knew God to work. When I looked at her when I looked at her like that, something hit me in the top of my head and ran down to the soles of my feet. Just like when I'm in church and the Spirit of God touches me and I get happy and shout. I did something I had never done before. Hugged Maggie to me, then dragged her on into the room, snatched the quilts out of Miss Wangero's hands, and dumped them into Maggie's lap. Maggie just sat there on my bed with her mouth open. Take one or two of the others, I said to Dee, but she turned without a word and went out to Hakim a barber.
Okay, so we find this daughter pushing her way around the house, right? Claiming things. She's not even asking whether it's not even a request that, may I have or things like that. She's being very sweet and nice. We know why she's doing that. And then she's already taken these quills and she's already claimed her right over them. And then the mother's refusing. Mother's saying that no, because I've already saved it for Maggie, because when she gets married, I would be giving this to her. So what does she say? Dee says that Maggie does not know the worth of these quills and she'll be using it for everyday use. And after 5 years, it will all be torn and tattered. So this is something really precious and relic. You should not be using it for everyday purpose. So the mother is asking, "What are you going to do with the quilt?" Then she's saying, "I'm going to hang it." So you can see two very different perspectives towards what you can do with the things of your heritage, things that belong to your custom and tradition. So for one, it is like having it in in a museum, and for the other, it's a matter of everyday use. And look at Maggie; she comes from the kitchen, and then she says, "Okay, she can have it. It's okay." And then the mother looks at the daughter, and she sees how she looks so meek and submissive, because all her life she has been the one who has lost everything, and she's so used to it, sacrificing and giving and giving and giving all her life. So the mother's watching both the daughters, and on one hand you see Dee all ambitious, selfish, just living only for herself, not thinking about anyone, doesn't really understand the value of one's own roots, one's own tradition. Whereas the other hand, Maggie is saying that I can remember my grandmother even without the quilts. So for her, all these things are actually a part of her own life, part of her own system. She doesn't need quills to remember the past or to say, the kind of tradition and background she comes from. So now watching these two girls, all of a sudden, the mother feels as if she's hit by some kind of a revelation, some kind of a lightning, and she compares that sensation to the times she had felt the same when she was in church. That is when you are praying a lot and you feel that you're being filled with the spirit of God. She experiences something like that. So what does she do? All of a sudden she jumps, and then she just runs and she snatches these quills out of Dee's hand. She just takes it away with a lot of force, and then she dumps them into Maggie's lap. And then Maggie's just sitting there with her mouth open. And then mother's telling Dee that take one or two of the others as in the other quills that were kind of stitched using the sewing machine. So now look at Dee. She's very angry. She's upset. She feels insulted. So she's just turning without a word and she's going out to Hakima Barber. So she's not even saying bye. She's simply leaving the house. She's simply come like a visitor and she wanted to take away all these things that were lying in the house all these years. And earlier, when she had gone to college, the mother had offered her. At that time, she did not want. But now she's come back to take away all these things, to exhibit these things in front of other people, which the mother now refuses. So she feels very bad and she walks out. Continue.
You just don't understand, she said as Maggie and I came out to the car. What don't I understand? I wanted to know. Your heritage, she said. And then she turned to Maggie, kissed her, and said, You ought to try to make something of yourself too, Maggie. It's really a new day for us. But from the way you and Mama still live, you'd never know it. She put on some sunglasses and that hid everything above the tip of her nose and chin. Maggie smiled, maybe at the sunglasses, but a real smile, not scared. After we watched the car dust settle, I asked Maggie to bring me a dip of snuff, and then the two of us sat there just enjoying until it was time to go in the house and go to bed.
Okay, so that's the end of the story. So now Maggie, on the way out, what is she telling? That you just don't understand. What do you don't understand? So not Maggie, D is telling that Mama and Maggie, they don't know the value of their heritage. And then she's kissing her sister and she's giving a parting advice to the sister that you ought to make something of yourself too. So from this line, we come to know that indirectly she's saying that I made my life. That is, I made it. So I think you also ought to do something like that. And it's really a new day for us. So she's already kind of saying how she's different from the mother and Maggie. So already they are living a very different kind of a life. And then she's saying, just because you're staying in the same house and the same kind of style of living, you really don't know what the outside world is and what the whole development is. That's what she's saying. See, but the way you and Mama still live, you would never know, because it's kind of living in what you call that fraud, that toad in the well. That's a kind of world that is inhabited by Mama and Maggie. So Dee is telling them, like, get out of this world and try to go and get a life for yourself. That's the advice she's giving. And then she puts on her sunglasses so that would hide everything. And then you have Maggie smiling for the first time, maybe, a real smile. So the mother's looking at it and wondering whether the smile is at the sunglasses, but then it's a real smile and she's no more scared. Now you have Maggie becoming a little confident. Why? Because here the mother stood up for Maggie. Mother fought and got those quills back from Dee and she gave it to Maggie. So for the first time she's feeling a kind of that affirmed, that affirmation of her sense of worth and identity, because of which she's feeling much more confident. So now the car leaves, that is Dee and Hakima Barber, they have left just as they came. So now these two are now sitting there and watching the dust settling after the car passed by. And then she's asking Maggie to get her some dip of snuff. Snuff is that old people here in our society community also, right? They put that snuff in the nose, and old people they use. So here both of them they use it, and then they're just sitting there with the snuff in the thing. I mean snuff in the nose, and they're simply sitting and enjoying until it was time to go into the house and go to bed. So you find here a picture of ultimate relaxation, a slow way of life compared to that of D. For D, everything was kind of in a hurry burry, and for her luxury and happiness meant something else, whereas for these people they are very happy and they are quite content. There is satisfaction with what little they have and they're very happy about it. And earlier also we've seen how the mother was saying that we did not need all the kind of knowledge that the daughter was trying to push down their throat. That is when Dee started getting educated, right? She was trying to read to them and tell them and convert them and change them. The mother saying we don't need all this. So they're very content and they're very happy with what they have. All right, so you have two different perspectives, two different ways of looking at it. You can, it's more than that, more than a generation gap. It's something else. It's how you look at life. Whether you want to go along this slow mode, being content with what you have, being very mindful of things, or you can just be very artificial, superficial, go with the rush, and then you do things just to show others. You just want to put up a show like D. So that's the story all about. I hope you have enjoyed reading the story and watching that small clip that was shared.